What's up? It's your book club. I'm Mary.
And I'm Imani.
And this is our first episode of our new podcast. So, what is your book club? Essentially, it's a podcast where the two of us are going to pick a young adult novel, read it, and then we get together to rant about it, analyze it, just generally discuss it.
Yeah, and so sometimes we might pick a book we both loved as kids, or one that doesn't get as much love as it should.
So here's the thing, young adult, like the YA genre, is really broad, and so you end up with a ton of different types of books that all get classified as YA. So as we go through, we sort of were thinking about, like, what makes something YA? What books do we pick? We've noticed a couple common themes in YA books. They're generally geared towards a younger, like, young adult audience, so like late middle school to like late teens, but often people outside that age range also really enjoy those kind of books. They often feature young adult characters, though sometimes there's books that are classified as young adult that aren't. And there's often themes of coming of age or self-discovery or some kind of finding your purpose in these stories.
So this month, we read Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. And as always, spoiler warning, no holds barred. We're talking about the entire book. So if you haven't read it, you're welcome to stay, but we recommend you go and read the book at the same time. We recommend you go and read the book at some point.
Or at the same time, if you're really good at multitasking.
Also, towards the end, we'll do a little bit of a book-to-movie comparison, which we won't always do, but this is a special case where there is a fascinating movie that goes along with it. All right, here's a bit of a summary of the book, just in case if it's been a while since you've read it. We start with the main character. Her name is Sophie, and she is the oldest child, as she always likes to say, and that's the reason why she is doomed to fail in life.
She's never going to amount to anything.
Ever. She always messes everything up. But she is put in charge of a hat shop, and the Witch of the Waste comes, and she curses her to be an old woman, and so then Sophie decides that because she's old, she's going to go seek her fortune, because she's old anyway. And so she comes across Howl's Moving Castle, and the wizard Howl has this terrible reputation of eating girls' hearts, but Sophie figures that because she's an old woman now, she's got absolutely nothing to fear. So she waltzes right in, she makes a deal with the fire demon, and she stays as their cleaning lady.
Which Howl just accepts. He's like, oh, you're my cleaning lady now. That's cool.
Like, yeah, sure, I guess Calcifer asked. Like, my fire demon said that things were bad, so... and so she lives in the house with Michael, which is Wizard Howl's apprentice, and kind of forms a little family there. All the while, the king of Ingary is looking for his brother, Prince Justin, as well as Wizard Solomon, who they all think have been taken by the Witch of the Waste. And Howl is the next best wizard, but he's also a
Yeah, he's a coward.
Right, he's a coward, and he doesn't want to look for Justin or the wizard, and the witch is after him anyway. And so he's courting women and trying to shirk his responsibilities. Sophie is causing trouble cleaning the house, but then also like causing mischief accidentally. And the somehow she like gets in with the king, and then she gets told that she's also a witch, and her sisters are there too, and her sisters are witches, and it's just like chaos and
yeah, and there's this whole thing with like the sisters switching where their two apprenticeships are because they didn't actually want to be in the places that they wanted to be.
And my summary is devolved completely, so I'm just gonna keep going.
That's fine. Are we trying to summarize the ending, or are we just moving on?
Yeah, we can try and summarize the ending.
So, like, eventually the scary John Donne prophecy curse thing is coming true.
Yes.
And Miss Angorian, the lovely Welsh school teacher, seems to have vanished. This woman that he seems to be courting, who also was engaged to Solomon, who turns out to be Wizard Suleiman.
So Ben Sullivan, who ends up being yes,
Yes,
who ends up being Wizard Solomon.
Yes, but she stumbles into the castle, and seems to be kidnapped by the Witch of the Waste, and so Sophie's like, oh, Howl loves her so much, I have to go after her and save her, like, poor lady, she got kidnapped.
And Sophie also feels guilty because she didn't watch over, sent her
yeah.
out into the garden. It's just like, I should have been nicer.
Yeah, why was I being so petty? Now she's kidnapped. So she goes and confronts the witch, figures out that the witch had gotten the two other guys, Prince Justin.
Yeah, there's just a body there that doesn't have a head.
She's like building a new person,
Yes,
right?
so she has the body of the wizard, Solomon. She wants Howl's head.
Yeah, so that she can have like an amalgamation of all of them.
And so that she can be the queen of Ingary, and he can be the wizard king.
But they like defeat the Witch of the Waste fairly quickly. Mm-hmm. Like, it's just kind of like, oh yeah, she's defeated now. Howl shows up and he's all disheveled, which is like, he's not concerned about his appearance, which is like the thing that's like, he's in love. And she's like, wow, he must love her so much.
Yeah.
Because she's oblivious and she's still an old lady. But then they go back and they find out that Miss Angorian, the school teacher, was actually the Witch of the Waste's fire demon.
Yes.
So they had a pact, and she's trying to get Howl's heart.
But then Sophie enchants her stick to beat Miss Angorian / fire demon, grabs Calcifer away from her, takes Calcifer off of Wizard Howl's heart, and lets him go free, and pushes Howl's heart back into Howl's body, speaking to it so that it lives.
Yeah. Because it's been established slowly that Sophie, like, when she talks to things, they come to life. Mm-hmm. And she's actually magic. Yeah, and then Howl wakes up and he's like, oh, I have to go save Sophie! Not realizing that she's there because she's broken the one curse, which means she's kind of broken all of the curses and she's young again.
Right. And then Wizard Howl defeats Miss Angorian / fire demon, and Prince Justin and Wizard Solomon go back into their rightful bodies and places.
And then Howl and Sophie decide they're gonna live happily ever after, and it'll be a lot more eventful than it is in the stories, because they'll drive each other crazy.
Yes, and Calcifer comes back.
Because it was raining outside.
And so, presumably, the three of them live happily ever after. Do we want to talk about magic and curses?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
I think it's really interesting. I had something written down just on a broader spectrum, but it goes into how the magic works. Is that, like, this story is kind of about stories. Like, it doesn't have the rules of fantasy, but it has the tropes of fantasy. Like, the world is governed by the generic tropes of Western fantasy. And, like, it's about the stories people hear, the stories people tell themselves, how that shapes reality. So it sort of creates this, like, interconnected, like, the fact that all the curses are broken when one of them's broken, and the fact that, like, Sophie's belief that she's old is part of what's keeping her old, and stuff like that, is really interesting.
Yeah. The way that the different kinds of magic that are all there. So, like, the way that, like, Michael has to do spells and figure out the way that, like, those work. I think I wrote down... Oh yeah, he says, like, the shape of it should tell you a lot, whether it's self-fulfilling or self-discovering or simple incantation or mixed action and speech.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the most comprehensive, like, detail we get about the magic in this world. Because, like, with Sophie, it's just like, oh, actually, you just speak life into things.
But, like, obviously there's some mechanics to it.
Right.
And the fact that, like, they labor over this poem by John Donne and think that it's a spell, and are trying to figure out the mechanics of, like, maybe we take this thing and put it in this thing, or maybe this.
Or the Witch of the Waste was able to use an existing poem and turn it into a curse.
Yeah. Yeah, that was super interesting. Also, then there's, like, the magic of, like, the fire demons, which I think it's always, if you catch a falling star, then it turns into a fire demon. That's what it seems like. Because, like, they, at one point, Sophie and Michael see a falling star and they try to catch it because that's part of the poem, and so they think that's part of the song.
And the star's like, let me die.
Yeah. But obviously, we find out later Calcifer was a falling star and was scared of dying, and so Howl saved him and sort of made this deal and gave his heart.
Right.
In exchange for power? Did he have power before?
He did yes, he was a wizard before. And he was a very bright wizard. I wonder if you have to have somebody else's heart to be a fire demon. So, like, or somebody else's something. Like, I don't know. I don't know if it's always a heart that they have to give you. Or if it's just, you have to have some other force that you're living off of to be a fire demon. Otherwise, you're just a falling star.
Yeah. That could be. So does that mean after the contract with Calcifer is broken?
Yeah. Like,
is he still, like, how is Calcifer still there?
Sophie speaks life to him. Mm-hmm. Right, because Sophie asks if he'll die, if he is taken off of Howl's heart, and Calcifer says, if you do it, I won't.
Yeah.
But if anybody else did it, I would. And so she says, I help you or like, then live another 1,000 years. Which, like, might be a good idea, might not be a good idea. Like, there's this just, like, thing of power now that just, like, exists and is self-sufficient.
So, something I was thinking about today was, like, how does Howl have magic? Because he's just, like, this Welsh PhD rugby guy. And he says he wrote his doctoral thesis on, like, spells and stuff. And I didn't know if he actually did or if he was just lying in order to, like, cover. But, like, did he make a spell to open a portal and get to Ingary and then learn more magic? Did he know magic? Was he just always going back and forth? Because, like, his family seems to just not know. Like, they just think he's a washed-up failure and is doing nothing.
Which, I don't know why they think that. Like, sure, he might not have, like, a respectable position, but if he's like, he's a scholar who studies things.
Like, did he just go to another world to avoid his, like, student loans and responsibilities?
Can relate.
Like, he's like, oh no, responsibility. I'm gonna open a portal and become a wizard. Like, I could see that happening.
Right, and, like, who can become witching wizards? Because, so, I think he studied magic in school at some point and probably wrote some kind of a thesis on it, because we know that whatever he did, Wizard Solomon also did the same thing.
Yeah, because he's also from Wales.
Right. It's like, man, those Welsh.
Yeah.
But somehow he was able to, which I don't know at what point he was a student of Mrs. Pentstemon.
Yeah, because, like, it has to be after he figured out how to get there, unless she's also from Wales. But I don't think she is.
Wouldn't put it past her.
Yeah. But then, like, how did Miss Angorian get to Wales and get set up as a school teacher?
Right. So there are other ways and other portals to get between worlds.
Yeah.
Or maybe, just like how the different doors of the castle go to different places, like, maybe Wales just is another place and Ingary is another place.
It could be.
And maybe they're just far enough away.
Yeah.
That nobody's ever gone, or people don't usually go in between them. Except it wouldn't quite make sense why the technology is so completely different and the, like, rules of the world.
I guess this part of the story it's a really soft magic system. Like, there isn't a lot of defined rules. And so it's, like, playing on the, like, kids from an ordinary place discover a magic world. It's, like, playing on that trope, but in reverse. It's like, what is this strange world? Yeah. Strange people.
Called Wales.
Huh.
Can we just, like, talk about Howl for a little bit?
Yes.
You don't know when the, like, nice part of him, like, begins and the, like, everything negative about him, like, starts as well. Because we don't know why he was going to Wales all the time. Because he wasn't going to court Miss Angorian, we learn later. But we just don't know why he was going there. And, like, at one point he was, like, because we just assumed that because his heart was taken by Calcifer, he couldn't learn to love. And so he was just chasing these women constantly. But we don't know, once he met Sophie, was she now the only person that he was trying to chase, and all of these things that he was doing in order to, like, help her?
Maybe? I kind of took it more as, like, Sophie doesn't realize that she's in love with him. And maybe, like, Howl has this idea of, like, this is, like, he has his method of, like, dealing with his problems by chasing beautiful women,
Yeah.
convincing himself he's in love with them, and then as soon as they commit, he, like, goes off and leaves. And the fact that he doesn't do that with Sophie because sort of the way they get to know each other is different. Maybe that says something about, like, if he wasn't actually in love with these other people and he's actually falling in love with Sophie, or, like, because maybe he doesn't realize he's in love or he's in denial, and so that's why he's, like, going off and doing other things, because he's like, nah, like, Sophie hates me. Like,
Right,
she'll
exactly.
never
Or
love me back. I have no chance.
He's described as, like, a slitherer outer.
Yeah.
So he, like, doesn't want to commit to things, but also he has this, like, love for spiders.
Yeah.
That's just kind of irrelevant.
He's just like, oh, like, I'm allowed to live in a pigsty if I want to. Like,
Right.
you have to
Right.
admit that.
Yeah. Yes. But, like, he has got this, like, it's not I love that he's not, like, a completely noble human, you know? Like,
No,
he's got
he's
this, like,
not.
right, but, like, he gave Calcifer his heart to keep Calcifer alive, and that was,
Yeah.
like, before any of this happened. So, like, he has this kind of, like, self-sacrificing, like, wanting to do good, and, like,
Yeah.
he does end up searching for the princess stuff, but he's a coward, he is vain.
He's
he,
so
like,
vain.
turns into a puddle of slime when he doesn't get his way.
Yeah. He just throws temper tantrums. But yeah, like, he took Michael in. Like, Michael was
Yes.
sleeping on his front doorstep and then, like, wouldn't admit it, but
Right,
took him in.
exactly.
And then, like, he was like, yeah, the only way I could do something brave was to, like, get drunk and convince myself that I wasn't gonna do it. Like,
Yes.
he's trying to do the right thing. He's just really bad at it.
Just really bad at it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, Sophie is also really bad at doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Like, she tries. The second time I read through the book, I, like, tried to, like, write down every time Sophie tried to do the right thing, and it, like, ended up just going terribly.
Just, like, backfiring completely.
Yeah. Oh, like, she almost puts out Calcifer.
Yeah.
And, like, she's not sorry about it. Like, she's, like, cleaning or whatever, and then she's
like, "Oh,
just,
it's fine."
she's like, it's fine, and then Howl comes in and, like, saves Calcifer. It's just kind of like, hey, you know, if he dies, I die.
And she, like, throws, like, plant weed killer at Howl's face. And then, like, near the end, she's like, oh no, I've ruined everything again.
Yeah, or she is the one who, like, she opens the black door, and so the curse is able to, like, come in.
Yeah.
But she's always like, I'm the eldest. It comes with being the eldest. Like,
Yeah.
that's why I'm so much trouble.
Yeah, it's funny because it seems like Howl is, like, not a great person because he thinks he's great, like, he thinks he's the best,
Yeah.
and he's super vain, and he thinks he's so beautiful, and so he throws a temper tantrum when he doesn't get what he wants, and Sophie, like, is kind of the opposite, like, she's like, oh, no one would love me, I'm old and ugly and the
Yeah.
oldest, so, like, oh, well, I'm just doomed to fail at everything. So they both have this little melodramatic streak, but, like, in different ways.
Yes. Yes. I also love how, like, throughout the entire book, like, Sophie is painted as kind of, like, the most reasonable of reasonable humans, kind of, just kind of like, all right, yeah, of course, like, everybody else around her is, like, kind of a child, and, like, she is just, like, the voice of reason, but, like, slowly towards the end, she starts, like, getting, like, super jealous of Miss Angorian, and, like, starts, like, acting out and being, like, really upset, and, like, like, throwing a weed killer at people.
Yeah.
And when Howl sends her out to go, like, clean up the mansion or something, and she's just like, great, because I really feel like killing something.
Yeah. Like, she's just like, they're both so unreasonable.
Right. But then Howl, yeah, is super, super unreasonable, and you're like, this man doesn't have, like, a noble thought in his head. And then at the end, you realize, like, oh, he's been, like, doing a lot of things for Sophie, like, trying to get Miss Penstemon to, like, take the magic off her, and he's been, like, healing her aches and pains and stuff
And,
like
like,
that.
he bought her nice clothes and all these things.
Yeah, and you're like, oh, okay. So, like, no one is quite as, like, purely one thing as they appear at the beginning. Because everyone kind of feels like a bit of a caricature. Or, like, even Fanny. Like, and I love Sophie's perception of Fanny and how it changes, even
Yeah.
when she's like, because of her being old, because she's just like, aw, like Fanny's just such a young thing, even though Fanny's her mom.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like that's like a thing throughout this, is it like sets up a trope, or it sets up like a character that's just like an outrageous sort of character and then turns it on their head. I mean, even we can talk in a minute about the like all the different identities, but also like right at the beginning it's like, oh yeah, like so now they're stepsisters, and you'd think because of that they'd probably be ugly, but actually they're all really pretty.
Yeah.
And just like things like that, like little things where it like acknowledges like,
Right.
oh yes, there's this trope that's true in the world, but actually it's not.
But not here. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm the youngest. And so I never thought of like, oh, the oldest being the one who fails first and fails the worst, you know? Like, it was just kind of like there are like arguments for like, oh, what's it better, to be the oldest or to be the youngest? And like people always like, oh, the youngest is the one that gets spoiled or gets like gets to have everything sooner.
As an oldest child, I feel that sometimes.
But it's interesting how much weight she puts on that.
Yeah, and I guess in fairy tale terms, like you think of like, I don't know, like the Three Billy Goats, or no, not that one.
Oh,
That's
the
not
Three
what I'm
Little
thinking.
Pigs?
The Three Little Pigs, or like the what is it, Puss in Boots, where like the oldest child gets the mill and the second child gets the cart, but the third child only gets the cat, and so it seems like everything's terrible, but he's actually the one that ends up
Yeah.
with the thing. Like I feel like there's a lot of stories where it's like, oh, Jack, or whatever his name is, it's always Jack, is like
Jack.
has nothing and he's dim-witted, and so the older siblings like are like, oh, you won't amount to anything.
Yeah.
But then that's the character in the stories that ends up having adventures and stuff. So maybe that's part of why like Sophie is like, oh, well, I'm the oldest, I inherit the hat shop and nothing happens to me.
Yeah, and I love that they take her character and they're like, no, actually, like, you're the most interesting of them.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. But they're also all really interesting people.
They are.
Like, it's not just like, okay, we got rid of Letty and Martha, now they have their own thing. Like, they also do stuff.
This is our first episode, and we don't have sponsors yet, so we are looking to fill these spaces with ads, with real ads. But until then, we've got a couple of Howl's Moving Castle inspired products for you.
Yeah.
Mary?
So our first sponsor for today is English poet and writer John Donne. So you know those times when your heart is broken by a Welsh rugby player who has commitment issues, and you just want to curse him?
Oh, yes.
And just like make his life miserable forever. Well, what better way to do it than with a poem from John Donne that can also have realistic implications in a magical world like Ingary. So,
Yes, there are poems packed with mermaids and mandrakes and wind.
or wine. Depending on how you interpret it. Yeah. So, whatever your needs are for vengeance, for magic spells that may or may not actually work, for prophecies, John Donne is the best person to go to. Check out some of his work online. I'm sure you can find it. And thank you to John Donne for sponsoring this episode. Back to you, Imani.
Hey, that was great. I know where I'm going for my next heartbreak curse.
John Donne.
John Donne.
Is incorporated.
Not to be confused with Josh Dunn, the drummer from 21 Pilots.
He can sponsor the next episode.
Do we want to go through the different characters?
Sure.
So, starting with Sophie, she, like, her arc is just kind of like, she's, like, cursed, or she, like, doesn't think she's gonna amount to much. She inherits the hat shop, and it's just like, I have just this hat shop. She's also really scared of people, like, mousy. But, yeah, so she's really timid, not confident at all. And then she gets turned into this old woman, is suddenly this, like, raving mad, like, going to put everyone in their place.
Yeah, like, gains more confidence and starts acting old. That was the thing I was going to mention real briefly earlier. Sophie is younger than Howl, but acts much older, and Howl's, like, mid-20s, but acts like a child. And so I feel like there's a lot of these, like, you are one thing, but you act like another.
Yeah, and it's like not always what it seems. Like,
Yeah.
or I think the whole entire book is like nothing is what it seems like it is.
Yeah.
So then she has a younger sister named Letty? Letty.
Yes.
Letty, and then Martha's the youngest?
Yes. I think so.
Okay.
She has 2 younger sisters, Martha and Letty.
I think Letty is they had the same mom and the same father, and then her mother dies.
And Martha's her stepsister.
Yes, and Martha's her stepsister, Fanny's daughter. And Letty is apparently very headstrong and very, like, knows what she wants. Is she the really beautiful one?
Yes. Because everybody comes to the bakery and is like, Letty, Letty.
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
you're so beautiful.
Yes.
We love you.
Letty, her apprenticeship is at the bakery, and she's going to learn how to bake and be a baker.
And hopefully meet some rich, handsome man and do well for herself.
And Martha gets sent to Miss Fairfax, who's a witch, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, and it's just like, oh yeah, she's a witch.
Yeah.
Which, like, she's not a bad witch.
She just teaches people magic.
Right, at the beginning, when they're like, isn't she a witch? At first, or you're kind of like, oh, that's, like, kind of mean. And then they're like, yeah, she is a witch. You're like, oh, I guess that's not offensive.
And Martha will, like, learn all this cool magic because she's smart.
Right. But neither of them are very happy with that, and so they switch places.
Yep.
So then Letty's the one learning magic, and Martha is the one at the bakery.
But they're, like, disguised as each other for most of it. And so there's all
Yeah.
this confusion.
Yes, because there's 2 Lettys.
Yeah.
And then Michael from Howl's Moving Castle, like Howl's apprentice, falls in love with Martha, who he knows as Letty.
Yes. And Howl, for a while, is trying to woo actual Letty at Mrs. Fairfax. And we find out later that Letty, like, knew it was Howl and is like, oh, it's fine, like, whatever.
Right, yeah, Mrs. Fairfax was just like, he's a better wizard than I am, so you should, like, try and get him to teach you things.
Yeah.
And like, you'll, like, learn far more from him than you will from me, so, like...
Yeah, but Sophie's like, oh no, like, she's gonna be so heartbroken because Howl always woos women and then leaves.
Yes.
And he's like, oh,
right.
Letty.
Right, and the whole time you don't get to hear anything really from their perspective, you just get to hear it from Sophie's perspective. And in Sophie's perspective, Howl is this self-centered ignoramus who tromps around and winning the hearts of women and then casting them aside. So she's convinced that that's going to happen to Letty.
Yeah. Who else?
Mrs. Fairfax is Letty's teacher.
Yeah, and she, like, kind of sees through a lot of stuff. Did she know that the dog man was under a curse? I can't remember, because he was hanging around there.
Yes, because when she goes to see, or when Sophie goes to go see Mrs. Fairfax and Letty, Sophie is talking to Mrs. Fairfax, and she's just like, oh yeah, but Letty's in love with somebody else, and it's a very sad case. Or not in love with somebody else, but it's just kind of like, there's another man that it's just a very unfortunate situation. It's because he's cursed into being a dog.
Yeah, poor dear.
Yeah. I feel like no one ever says that. And the dog gets sent to go live with Sophie at some point because Letty is concerned that Sophie's gonna fall in love with Howl.
And she needs
Sophie
protected.
doesn't know. Right, and she needs to be protected, but Sophie doesn't understand that is that's a potential problem, because she's like, no.
Yeah, she's like, oh, Howl's terrible.
Exactly, he's terrible, and he knows that, like, he thinks I'm an old woman, and so, of course, like...
No way. It's impossible.
No way. Nothing's gonna happen there.
Yeah.
But then you find out that, like, Howl knew as soon as she was there that she was, an old woman. Or, sorry, that she wasn't an old woman, and that, like, tried to, like, take the magic off of her, but it just, like, wasn't working, so... Which, for me, was kind of like a, what? You mean you knew?
Yeah. Well, and at the very end, he's like, I was hoping you would be that pretty girl that I met in market shipping or whatever, that I was bothering.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, so, like, there's Howl's family in Wales.
Oh, yeah, Megan, Mari, and... Declan?
Declan's from the Raven Cycle.
Oh, you're right.
I feel like it's something, just like a generic name.
Yeah, he's not the most interesting one.
But, like, they go and visit them, and they just think Howl's, like, a washed up, lame loser.
Yeah, and so Megan starts, like, going after Howl, and then Sophie's like, wow, I understand why he's such a slither outer, because, like, Megan's the kind of person that you'd want to slither away from.
Yeah, and so then she's just like, Howl, come along, we have to make sure the servants are doing whatever, you have very important things to do.
So I wonder what Megan thought of that. Megan's like, who is this crazy old woman?
Why do you have an old woman and a teenager with you? Like, what? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And then there's Miss Angorian.
Yes.
Who's just introduced as a very beautiful, sort of aloof school teacher lady. She seems very pragmatic. Her whole house is set up for study and work and not for comfort.
Right.
And she apparently assigned this poem by John Donne.
Yes.
To the students.
But, to Howl's nephew.
Yeah, but it got mixed up. And I don't know if that was intentional or if it just happened. It was a little unclear of whether Howl, like, accidentally got it it accidentally switched when Sophie opened the door, or if she did it on purpose. But they go and talk to her, and then Howl starts falling in love with her and going back to Wales and trying to woo her all the time.
Right. Which, I don't know if that actually happens. And at some point he realized that she's the Witch of the Wast's fire demon?
Maybe.
Or...
Also, she was engaged to Sullivan.
Yes.
So, did she help, like, kidnap him then? 'Cause, like...
See, was she a person before the fire demon happened?
I don't know.
Or was she a person that, like, the fire demon, like, possessed? Like, I don't know.
I thought she was just, like, in disguise the whole time. Like, she was the fire demon. But does that mean Calcifer can do that? I don't know.
Right.
But, like, if she was the fire demon the whole time, and she was engaged to Sullivan, did she then just, like, help the Witch of the Waste, like, kidnap him?
Right.
Or, because she seemed like, oh, like, this belonged to my fiancé, oh, I'm so heartbroken.
Yes, this guitar, oh, yeah, yeah. But I don't know if that was a ploy, though.
Yeah, I feel like it was, to, like, get in the house. And,
right, because it doesn't quite make sense for, like, when she became Miss Angorian versus when it's very, like, it just briefly says at the end that, like, oh, her fire demon had the upper hand of her and had for a while.
Yeah.
But we don't know what that means. Like, is there something that you can do as a, like, person with a fire demon that gives them more power and, like, allows them to, like, manifest themselves in which you lose more of yourself?
Maybe.
Because, like, maybe if the witch gave Miss Angorian more power, that allowed her to, like, manifest into a human.
Yeah.
And
maybe.
Yeah.
It's possible.
Yeah. So it's interesting because the Witch of the Waste is supposed to be the biggest antagonist the entire time.
Yeah, and she's sort of looming.
Right. She, like, loves Howl.
Yeah, Howl slighted her and broke her heart. And so now she's mad.
Right, and she has taken both Wizard Solomon, the royal wizard, and Prince Justin. Or Prince Justin went to find him in the waste and just disappeared. And the only other thing that Howl really says about her is that she likes to think of herself as, like, a lily growing in, like, in barren waste, like the one flower that's just, like, blooming in the desert. She's like surrounded by the only beautiful thing.
Yeah, and so that's why when the, like, flowers started growing, she was, like, super mad.
Right.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really give any, like, so we know that she's really old and she's been kept alive by her fire demon.
Yeah. I almost wonder if she wasn't actually the one that was capturing, like, the other, like, Prince Justin, because the reason that, I don't know, maybe she was somewhat being controlled. I don't know, because it seems like because she was trying to build a person.
Right.
And the fire demon
could have been
I don't know.
It could have been that Miss Angorian was saying to her, like, telling her, like, hey, you can be queen if you do these things.
Yeah.
And so giving, like, I think you're right in thinking that it was probably Miss Angorian that was controlling more of it than the witch.
Yeah. But she also needed something. She needed Howl's heart because the witch's heart was almost dried up or gone or whatever.
Yes. Right, because it had been like hundreds of years or
guess.
whatever.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I
Who
don't
knows?
know. Yeah. Then there's Michael,
Yeah.
who he is this like what 18
He's
or
like a
16-year-old.
teenager. Yeah, I think 16.
Yeah.
Because they celebrate his birthday. That's the like fireworks at the beginning.
Yes. Yes. And he's this like, but very like starry-eyed apprentice. He's like an orphan and has no family. Showed up on Howl's doorstep, and then Howl took him in and let him be his apprentice, but like in a really slowly random manner, kind of like in The Princess Bride with Dread Pirate Roberts.
Yeah.
And he's like every night he'd say good night, hope like see you in the morning unless I
Decide to kill
kill
or
you
something.
in your sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah. He just like never made Michael leave. Like he never said he could
Yes.
stay. He just never made him leave, and that's kind of what happened with Sophie too.
Right, exactly, which suited Sophie just fine.
She's like, okay, cool.
That's fine. And then he falls in love with Letty, who's actually Martha,
Yeah.
at the bakery, and so is just besotted and keeps on going back and forth and back and forth. He's also trying to help Howl, and he also keeps track of Howl's money because Howl keeps like a terrible spender
Yeah.
of money, and like he'll spend it on like the worst things, like vain things.
Yeah.
And so like Michael keeps a very close
And, like,
tabs
hides it.
on. Yes. Which is like really sad that this like 16-year-old kid's like in charge of finances.
Because Howl's just a mess, and like they have no food, and he just goes out and buys like a fancy guitar from a pawn shop.
Right,
He's, like,
exactly.
Does everything for the aesthetic, essentially. Like
Yeah. And Michael thinks that he takes it around with him to court women, and he's just like, he doesn't even know how to play.
he just carries it around.
Just carries it around because it makes him more attractive.
Yeah. He thinks it makes him look cool, I guess.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's Calcifer, and I love Calcifer.
He's so funny.
He's also pathetic.
Like, oh, he made me do it. Oh.
Yeah. Sophie bullied me.
Yeah.
You're like, you're a fire demon. She's an old woman. Like, what are you afraid of?
Yeah.
But Sophie is pretty terrifying.
She's pretty strong-willed.
Right. Which is funny because she had to be old to find her strong-willed.
Yeah.
I guess.
I guess. Like, it was just, like, getting over the hang-up of, like, oh, I'm just, like, this hat lady who hides at home.
Right. Which I think maybe that was the point of it. Like, once, like, her identity was, like, taken away, then she was, like, because, like, all she had ever done was make hats. Then she was able to actually grow into who she wanted to be, or who she really was.
Yeah.
Which was a gnarly old woman.
Very opinionated, strong-willed old woman. Yeah, because, like, at the beginning, like, all the identity markers that, like, Sophie thinks of herself as, like, all the things she has to define who she is have been, like, assigned to her. Like, oh, you're gonna inherit the hat shop because you're good at it, and you're practical. Oh, you're the
Right.
oldest. Oh, like, you're not very pretty because your sisters are pretty. Like, kind of plain. Like, she didn't have anything at the beginning that, like, made her an interesting, unique character. And I feel like if we just had normal, not old Sophie that, like, just got thrown into something, it
Right.
might...
It wouldn't
like,
have-
she wouldn't have been as interesting of a character, but because she had this thing, this other thing that was sort of thrust on her that she just kind of embraced, then,
Yeah.
like, she
Yeah.
started to figure out more of, like, who she was and get opinions and be in a different environment. Like, I think her having to leave home because she's like, oh no, they're gonna freak out that I'm old, I guess I have to leave. Like, getting away from that helped her, like, get a
Yeah.
new perspective.
And I wonder if, so you realize that, she realizes that she has the magical ability to speak life into things, and that kind of starts when she's talking to the hats,
Yeah.
because she has nobody else really to talk to. And so I wonder if that was a thing that she had her entire life, but she always just had her sisters, so she wasn't really talking to things as much as when they left, and it was just her.
Yeah.
And then she just kind of, like, started to talk to them and was just like, I guess. And then she became an old woman and she was just like, well, old women talk to things all the time.
It's fine.
And so she's like talking to scarecrows and talking to talking to her stick.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder if she always had this power, if that had any influence on how Martha and Letty were at home versus how they were when they went off on their own.
Oh,
Like,
that's true.
whether or not,
Oh,
like,
that's
Sophie
right.
kind of defines the identity of things in the way she thinks about them and talks to them.
Yeah.
I don't know, that's a hypothetical. But, like, it could be, like, they're kind of like, we're like this, but then when they leave and they're away from Sophie, they're like, oh,
Right.
actually...
Yeah. I think Martha goes through a little bit of that when she kind of just, like, realizes that all she really wants to do is get married.
Yeah. And, like,
and
have
she's
10
just in the
children or
bakery.
whatever.
Yeah, exactly. You're just like, okay.
She's like, I gotta start now. Like, if I'm on
Right.
10. I also saw this post about how at the very beginning when Sophie's trimming hats, she says something about like, oh, Howl and the Witch of the Waste, like they'd be a good match. They should get together, and how that's
Yeah.
also true. Like that comes
Yeah.
true too. Like,
Yeah.
but yeah, all the hats, like she'll trim a hat and be like, oh, you're going to marry into money, and then like whoever's daughter ends up meeting this rich duke, and like.
Yes.
Fall in love.
Jane Farrier.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're like, oh, I want a hat like that. Yeah.
I like how vastly different the like beginning of the book is to like the end of the book, because
Yeah.
the beginning of the book is just like, oh, these like women are like gossiping about all of these other things that are happening in the, and like you hear all of the things that are important to the story through the hat shop, because you hear that Wizard Solomon's gone missing, you hear that Prince Justin's gone missing,
You hear about Howl.
you hear that Jane Farrier's gone off somewhere.
Yeah.
Yes, you hear that Howl eats women or eats their
Eats
hearts.
their
not-
hearts, yeah.
And so like that's like a source of really like useful information that like Sophie kind of takes in but doesn't really take in, and then it's like relevant later on.
Yeah. Yeah. I really like that, like, these characters that are introduced at the beginning, like her family, aren't just, like, irrelevant characters. Like, they're all
Yeah.
there for, like, the dramatic showdown. Like, her sisters that kind of went off and did
Yeah.
their own thing came back, and her stepmother who, like, got married super rich again, like, comes back, and they all really care about her.
Yeah.
And, like, recognize her immediately. Like, Sophie has all these concerns
Right.
of, like, oh no, they won't know who I am, all this stuff. And they're all like, Sophie, what happened? You look so old. Are you sick?
Right, yeah, they're like, are you sick? Have you been overworked? Like
But, like, her stepmother, who seems very much like, oh, I'm just gonna leave Sophie the hat shop and do whatever, is actually,
Right.
like, nice
yeah.
and concerned.
Yeah.
And, like, they all help her clean up the house, and they're all very opinionated.
Yes. Yes.
Sophie's
they
like,
are all
oh,
very
poor Howl,
strong-willed.
all his spiders.
Yeah, they're gonna take away his spiders.
Yeah.
Yeah. And at the end, like it's Howl that like brings them all to her. Like it doesn't really explain that much, but he's just like, yeah, I thought that like that would like keep you occupied for a little while. Which like I feel like all of the really nice things that he does, he just like somehow managed to like cover over
like,
the
"Oh, I
fact
wasn't
that it
being
was
nice."
nice and just being like, it's like, no, you're just like an old like
Oh, it's just so you'd stop bothering me.
Right, exactly. Like I got you these nice clothes because you can't go see the king in what you're
Yeah,
wearing.
you have to go blacken my name in style.
Right, exactly. That's also a very funny part of the book where she has to go and blacken Howl's name and it ends up totally not working.
Yeah.
Which it's interesting because Howl actually meant for her to go and like blacken his name.
Yeah.
Like she was just like, no, yeah, please don't. And then it ends up like she ends up making Howl look good,
Yeah.
or at least the king was looking for those kinds of was looking for the qualities that she expressed about him.
I love at the very end, they're like dramatically gazing into each other's eyes, like Howl and Sophie. And Howl's like, I only did it for the money. And Sophie's like, I don't believe you. I think we should get married and live happily ever after. Yeah, but it should be hair raising. Like, it's not gonna be as good.
It's not gonna be one of those like chill, peaceful, happily ever afters that most of the movies have.
They're gonna drive
It's
each
like-
other crazy, but also
Yes, and I love that that's the kind of like love that they share. Like, yes, they drive each other nuts, and yes, they don't do the right things all the time, and and like a lot of it's like miscommunicated, like how she thought this and she was like convinced of this, and then Howl was like actually trying to do this,
Yeah.
and it's just like all of this like jumble of like messy relationship, but it's just like aw,
Yeah.
like at the end they're like, well, I guess we like are really fond of each other and like really love each other.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and all the setup of that, like it's like it doesn't feel like, oh, it's a plot twist that they're in love, but it's also not like
No.
super cheesy, like, the first time I saw you, I gazed into your blue eyes, and this thing,
Right.
that thing.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. It's not like all along, like everything's pointing to this. It's just kind of like something that like was uncovered and happened, and you kind of like realize along with Sophie. And like all the times that she like speaks up for Howl, and it's just kind of like, wait, I'm telling the truth. Like she's like confused because she's just like, no, he's not a terrible person. And she's like, I guess I just said that, and I guess I mean
But
that.
like,
Like,
I shouldn't,
But
like,
really?
he is a terrible person, right? Maybe not?
he's awful. I think so.
I don't know. Yeah.
Or when like she like feels pity for him, and then he like does things, and her pity is just like
She's
gone.
just like, never mind.
And she's just like, never mind. You, yes, you.
Like, he's so pathetic
deserve
that
it.
when he's actually miserable, she's just like, quit complaining. Like, he gets
yeah,
sick.
Like when he gets sick.
He's just like, ugh. I'm dying of neglect, or maybe I'm just dying.
Yes.
And she's like, oh, whatever.
It's a great quote. Yes.
Also, he's
It's-
like, I'm going to bed where I may die. And just like walks up the stairs miserably, sniffling for attention or whatever. There's some quote about that. The dialogue. I love the dialogue in this. Like, it feels natural, but it's also like kind of over the top.
Yes, yes. And it's kind of like, oh, I definitely can like relate and like feel and like hear other people saying that, but it's just like at their like lowest or like
Yeah.
most dramatic.
Like, all the banter of like, oh, yeah, you should go and destroy something else now, Sophie.
Right, she's like, good, I feel like killing something.
Yeah. It's great. Like, oh, Sophie's meddling in things again. Mrs.
Yes,
Nose or whatever.
Mrs. Nose.
Yeah.
They're both just delightful in very, very contrasting ways.
Yeah.
Then there's Mrs. Penstemon,
Yeah.
who's there for a very brief moment, but like her conversation with Sophie and how she's just like, oh yes, like you're a very talented witch yourself. And Sophie's just like, yes, I am. And then Sophie leaves and she's just like, wait, what?
Like,
Like, I just,
yeah.
I very much believed it, and it makes sense.
Yeah.
So,
Is that where,
All right.
where like, she asked, like, I'm 84, how old are you? And Sophie's like,
Yes.
90.
Yes.
And Mrs. Penstemon looks a little bit jealous. She's like, oh, wow.
Like, wow, yeah. It's just like, I just said that because it was, like, sounded old.
Yeah, like, I just picked a number. Yeah. Well, and her funeral is another time when you see, like, Howl actually cares. Like, even if it's in his own
Yes.
vain way. Like, he dyes his hair black, and he makes his suit black, and then, like, turns into a dog, but, like, he's still
Right.
wearing black because she cares about the details. Like, Mrs.
Right,
Penstemon always cared
exactly.
about the details, so I gotta.
Right. Yeah. And he is very, very devoted, very dedicated, even if it's like, even if it's in like kind of like silly, superficial
Yeah.
ways. But like, he's just like, no, I am gonna go to her funeral, even if it kills me.
Yeah, like, he just doesn't know how to show his affection, so he just, like, does dramatic things.
Yes, very
Like, he's
dramatic
like,
things.
I have feelings, I gotta do something about it, I don't know what.
Yeah, which I guess makes him very childlike. Like, another thing that makes him very childlike. Just, like, the inability to, like, process emotions and, like, healthily do things about them.
It wasn't, so, I'm trying to remember the book, because I haven't read that part in a while. When in his life does he catch the falling star? Because in the movie, it's when he's a kid.
Right, it doesn't say.
Okay.
The timeline is really fuzzy to me as well, because I know that it happens, or I'm pretty sure that it happens after he was Mrs. Penstemon's
Yeah,
student.
because she's like, he's, like, done something bad.
Going to the bad.
Yeah.
Yes. And it happens after that because she's like, oh yes, I like heard about something about he had a fire demon, or so it's true that he actually has a fire demon.
Yeah.
So it happens afterwards, and he's very, so at some point he's in Wales, and then he's in Ingary and a student, and then he catches, and he's like a successful wizard for a while, and then he catches the falling star, and then that's when his life kind of like not devolves, but like that's when, yeah, so he didn't have Calcifer for all that long.
Yeah.
If he's still in his 20s.
Yeah. Unless, I mean, it's possible that, like, he got to Ingary before he, like, became a PhD student, and he's been going back and forth.
It's true.
Because it could be that, like, you have
That's
the
true.
classic,
like, he found that as a kid.
Yeah, like, kid stumbles into another world and discovers that he's actually a wizard kind of thing.
Yeah.
But then, like, he also is still in Wales because he can get back somehow, and is like, that's why he's writing his thesis on spells and charms and stuff, is because he's like discovered that he has magic.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It could be.
Right. I wonder if anybody can learn to use magic, and just some people are like gifted in it. So when you because Martha and Letty both get sent to Mrs. Fairfax, or at least at some point are at Mrs. Fairfax.
Yeah, and it's not like
Martha's able to do enough magic to turn into Letty.
Yeah. And it's not like they're like, do you have magic? If you do, we'll send you off to this witch. It's just like, oh, you can learn from her. Like, it's a skill.
Exactly. Yes, it's a skill. It's just like being a hatter, you know? Like it's a skill that you, or being good at math, like that kind of thing. Because Michael is also an apprentice. Yeah. And it wasn't like, oh, you're right. But I think some people are gifted, like have another gift.
Yeah.
Like how Sophie doesn't know that she's doing magic, but she can just talk to people, or talk to inanimate objects and bring them to life.
Yeah. Because there's like the magic of like, here's this spell you need to study.
Yes.
You need to learn magic, which seems to be what Martha and Letty both kind of do a little bit.
Yes.
And then there's also just like, it also comes naturally.
Yes, to some people. Yeah, I think that's how magic works.
Maybe. I can see that. I mean, it's all like, Sophie doesn't understand it, so it's not explained. But I guess it's kind of like in Harry Potter, when it's like some kids like from the time they're little are just like doing magic, but then others have to like study really hard to learn anything.
Yes. Yeah. I guess it's just kind of maybe like anything in life, and if you're like, oh yeah, like I think I want to be a witch, like you could if you wanted to, but
you gotta work hard at it.
You could also, or you could also be a baker. Yeah, you know.
Yeah, all the professions.
Chosen professions of the country of Ingary.
Yeah.
All right, for our next ad, we have a turn you into a horse cloak. Have you ever wanted to go outside but weren't a horse?
Yes, all the time.
If that's you, have I got the product for you. The product of a lifetime. So, this cloak not only masks your identity, but it also produces 2 extra limbs. In a sense, because then you will be a horse and can walk on your hands. You will still have hands and feet, I assume, but you will look like a horse. I don't know if this, like, increases your speed ability or your desire to lick salt, but yeah, it's a real problem. Side effects may include. But yeah, if ever you have this magical funeral that you would like to attend but can't because there is a witch chasing you and a curse that's impending, why not try out the Turn You Into a Horse Cloak? Available at stores near you. Thank you for sponsoring this episode.
I've always wanted to be a horse and also go outside.
In this day and age, both are.
An added convenience
both
is
are
that
necessary.
People will give you more space in Walmart, and you'll not have to remind them about social distancing.
Do we want to talk about how it's YA?
Sure. I mean, first of all, you've got main character that's like just entering adulthood. There's a bit of a coming of age, even if it's a weird coming of age story. Like, the story starts...
She comes into the age of 90.
Like, the story starts with her, like, okay, you're kind of, like, coming into this position of owning the hat shop, all this stuff.
Yes.
Discovering who you are as a person. So there's that kind of growth, like, personal growth thing.
Right. And, like, having to make big decisions without, like, parental guidance, or without any
or
kind
experience,
of guidance, and just, like, deciding, right, or exactly, yes. It's just, like, resolving to do something and doing it. And each character does that, like, but specifically, like, Sophie, Martha, and Letty.
Yeah. There's a lot of, like, this is untrodden territory, but I'm just figuring it out as I go, and I'm also figuring out who I am as it goes.
Yeah.
And what my purpose in life is, which seems to be a theme.
Yeah.
I feel like I almost wonder now whether or not it would still be published under YA, just because it is an older book. It's from, like, the 80s.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Wow. I'm pretty sure. But it's like 86, I think.
Wow. That sounds right. Yeah.
But, like, because the characters are a little older than the classic, like, high school age.
Yes.
But I don't know what else it would fit into. I feel like that's a lot of YA, is just like, well, it's not a children's book, and it doesn't fit with just, like, adult fiction.
Not... Yeah. Yeah. And, like, the themes of, like, trying to, like, not only, like, figure out who you are, but also to, like, I don't know if adult fiction, like, the adults in their fiction make as many mistakes as the people in these books do, you know? There's the, like, floundering effect of, like, I'm not quite sure what's going on yet, and I don't have my feet under me, but I'm doing the best that I can, or I'm keep on trying and keep on failing, but but each failure gets me a little bit closer to what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, I haven't read tons of, like, adult fantasy, but it definitely, from what I know of, like, the popular stuff, it doesn't have that same, like, heroes, like, it doesn't have the same hero's journey arc. Like, I feel like the classic, like, hero's journey of, like, discovering a new world or something and having to overcome your flaws in order to face something, to save something. I mean, like, that's the classic fantasy trope, but, like, I don't know, the adult fantasy novels that come to mind is, like, Game of Thrones, which is not the classic, like, I'm going to overcome this flaw and defeat this evil. It's a lot more like history and battles and politics.
Yes, politics, and, like, and less about, like, individual struggles and more about, like, the struggles as a whole.
Whereas, like, even like high concept sort of, like, big huge, like, Hunger Games-esque stories that have, like, politics and stuff going on, it's really about this one character that feels kind of out of their depth. I think that's probably a really good point. Now I want to look at more adult fiction.
Right. Like, Lord of the Rings, even that, I feel like the characters just know what they're doing a lot more than in Howl's Moving Castle specifically, but in YA, like, more generally.
Yeah. I wonder...
which I guess we'll learn as we read more.
Yeah, I wonder whether, like, the ratio of, like, plot-driven stories to character-driven stories is different depending on the genre. I feel like it probably is. Like, I feel like thrillers and, like, cool shoot-'em-up detective stories are less about, like, how did you change as a person?
What did you learn?
Yeah, but, like, most YA, a big thing is, like, even if it's mostly plot-driven and the characters aren't well-written, there's something about, like, how did these events change you? And how are you growing?
And they're much different. Yes, they're different, and because they're in a different stage of life, they're in a younger area where there is more opportunity for growth, and they're less set in their ways, and they're more open to making mistakes, and more willing to just plunge headfirst. And I think that's why reading them as a younger adult, you kind of resonate with it more, because you're like, oh yeah, like, you admire that ability to just, like, plunge into something, and you relate with that, like, having no idea what's going on.
Yeah, like you sort of get to experience this new thing with the characters instead of like, this is John Steele. He's been an ex-military crime fighter for 20 years and he always knows what to do. Like, you get to see the new world of like magic or this adventure or figuring out some family issue. You get to experience it with them.
Right, exactly. And it's, I don't know, maybe that's one of the reasons why I like it, because there's less, so when you think of, like, I read a bunch of John Grisham books, in, like, at some point, and they're very, like, he was a lawyer, and then he was an author, and, like, a lot of his are, like, law-based, and they're very, like, really intricate and really cool, but, yeah, it's not that same kind of, like, fubbling, like, like, coming of age type that you get from YA, which is just so much fun.
I wish, like, now that I'm past, like, the technical young adult range, I wish there were those same kind of stories with characters that were older. Because, like, when you're in your 20s, you're still not like, oh, I know what to do now. You're still figuring things out. And you can still, like, go on adventures. And, like, I don't know, like, having read even stuff by the same authors, like reading Neil Gaiman, his young adult stuff that's in the young adult section of the library versus the stuff that's just in the sci-fi fantasy section of the library. Like, there's a lot of overlap, but it is sort of like, oh, like, these are different types of people sometimes.
Yeah.
And, like, I've looked through our downtown library, like, they're just generic fantasy section, and it's, like, all the books seem the same. Like, they feel like the same type of thing. Yeah. Because, I don't know, it seems like the YA market has a lot less patience for, like, what's the word? For, like, you doing the same thing.
Oh, for like, repetitive, templative, like, molded,
Like, people, like, the YA audience seems to always want stuff that's new and different. I mean, obviously there's trends of, like, oh, I love vampire romance, now we're gonna make a bunch.
Right, yeah, or kids fighting and for survival in dystopian eras.
Yeah. But, like, you can't have the same, like, what is the word for it? Yeah, I don't know what the word for it is, but, like, that follows the same sort of structure in each one. Formulaic, that's the word. Like, people get bored with that. At least I do.
They do. Yeah, I totally understand that. And, like, so when you think of, like, and even the genre of YA allows for you to, or doesn't allow for formulaic stuff, so it, like, in contrast to, like, Christian romance novels, you know, where, like, they are, like, Karen Kingsbury cranked out, like, so many books. And they
have to follow certain guidelines. Like, it has to be certain things for it to fit in that genre, or it's not that anymore.
Right, and I think you see that less with, like, authors having, like, 50,000 books. Like, I mean, obviously there's, like, Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys, but those were very formulaic, and they're kind of losing their shine. I loved them growing up.
But yeah, they're all kind of the same. Same thing.
Yeah, which the ones that stick around are the ones that I enjoy, are the ones that, like, it's a world that I haven't thought about before, or it's playing, like, have you said, even though this was written in the 80s, like, playing off of tropes and, like, knowing what the tropes are so that you can change them just a little bit.
Yeah. I think another thing is just, like, knowing about the publishing industry. Like, if you have a book, even if it's a great idea, if it doesn't fit, like, if you don't know where it would go on the shelves in the bookstore, they're much less likely to publish it. Like, Ari, my friend, I can name drop people. My friend Ari had this cool idea for, like, it was technically a fantasy setting because it wasn't the real world, but there wasn't magic. And so it was like, how do I pitch this? Because where would it go? It's not historical fiction, but it's not fantasy, because there are expectations of, like, this is this type of story, this is why you put it here, and if it doesn't fulfill those, the audience is going to be mad because they got it off this section of the shelf.
Right, and they're like, I was looking for this kind of a book.
But, like, with YA, because it's just the target audience rather than a genre. Like, you have YA fantasy and stuff. You can get away with, like, breaking a lot more molds and having a story that's like, this is about someone figuring out their place in their family, but also there's fairies, and that's just a side thing.
Yeah.
Or, like,
Yeah.
oh, we thought this was, like, some, like, adventure story, but it turns out to actually be this thing. Like, you can just, there's a lot more freedom to, like, break expectations because there's somewhere to put it. And that's why the YA genre isn't really a genre anymore. It's like saying anime as a genre, which, like, has, like, fun stuff for kids, and it also has, like, horror and stuff that's, like, very adult. But, like, it's just like, we're gonna put it here because we don't know.
I wonder if it's less of a genre and more of, like, a style, you know? And just, like, it has, like, draws from the same kind of things, but is free to not as well. But, yeah, like you said, kind of catch-all. Yeah. But still geared towards, like, 15 to 20-year-olds. I don't know. I don't know who's technically in the genre.
Because technically there's also a new, smaller genre that's new adult, that's, like, after young adult, which is weird.
Yeah, okay, but the problem with those is I feel like they're not, like, the stories that come out of them aren't better, and they're more geared towards, oh, because you're older, we can, like, have more, like, sex in them, or because you're older, we can have more, like, violence in them, or language in them, and it's not making the story any
it's just
better.
like
it's just like
a more mature version of YA that they're like, oh, now that we aren't putting this in the kids section, we can put all this other stuff in just cause.
Right. Yeah, not because it enhances the story, but
then there's also YA books that have all of that in them.
That's true.
Like, tons of swearing, tons of violence, tons of sex and stuff. But they're YA, and so you're like, what?
You're just like, what are you guys doing?
It's a really interesting genre. I wanna find more things, because I know there's so many, like, video essays and stuff about what makes things YA.
That's true. Yeah, for sure.
Movie.
Do we wanna... Yeah, let's talk about the movie.
Something I found out today. So apparently Christian Bale is from Wales. But they had him do an American accent for the movie. I don't know why. They were just like, yeah.
Do you know who's Welsh? Christian Bale.
You know who else is Welsh? Howl.
Howl?
Nah.
But
he's not Welsh in the movie.
Maybe let's keep it. Yeah, that's true. Wales is completely not in the movie. Okay. So, the plot summary for the movie is Sophie, who's played by Emily Mortimer, which Emily Mortimer does a killer old woman voice, by the way.
It's great.
She did fantastic. Anyway, has an uneventful life at her late father's hat shop. But all that changes when she befriends Wizard Howl, who's Christian Bale, who lives in a magical flying castle. However, the evil Witch of the Waste, Lauren Pascal, takes issue with her budding relationship and casts a spell on Sophie, which ages her prematurely. Now Howl must use all his magic talents to battle the jealous hag and return Sophie to her former youth and
But that's not what happens!
That's not at all
like,
what
the main
happens.
conflict is, like, war. And, like, losing
Yes.
yourself to war versus having a peaceful life.
Right, exactly. And, like, the Witch of the Waste she's only an antagonist for, like, halfway through, and then she gets, like, then the king, actually, who is Mrs. Penstemon.
But no, it's a lady, but it's Wizard Solomon.
Yes, thank you, yes.
Or
yes.
Solomon, I don't know how they said it.
Wizard Solomon is the king's official wizard. And she is wanting to... She took away all of the Witch of the Waste's power and, like, put her in a room with candles and, like, melted her down to this, like...
Yeah, like blobby lady.
Really old and, like, yes, very, like, gloopy little senile woman. And then, like, Wizard Solomon is the bad guy.
Yes, she's just kind of trying. I think did she start the war? Someone started the war.
Maybe?
Because the war was that some prince from some distant place has disappeared,
Yes.
and they think Ingary
Yes.
or wherever stole him, and he's actually the
Yeah.
turnip guy.
Yes.
And then he just hops
Yes.
away at the
and
end.
Right, exactly. He's just like, I'm just gonna
Goodbye.
go home
Oh,
now.
Sophie doesn't love
War's
me. That's
over.
okay.
Yes.
So the focus is more on, like, Howl's kind of being forced to fight in this war, but he doesn't really want to.
Right. Right. But he's not a coward in
No.
this one. He's tired and he's dying. Like, he comes back from the war, from, like, fighting every couple of nights or whatever, and, like, he's just, like, a disheveled, kind of bloody mess. Also, he's a Birdman.
He's a Birdman, and then he gets more bird-like, and we don't know if it's because, like, if he transforms too much, that's what happens. I think.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So, all of the wizards in Ingary are commanded to fight for the king and fight on behalf of the kingdom. And all of the other kingdoms' wizards are also fighting. And apparently, if you're a wizard and you turn into an animal or a monster in order to, like, fight, you can only do that so many times, or it uses a lot of power, and so eventually you can't turn back. And so then there's all of these, like, weird,
like, monsters,
creatures with top hats. that like, they have top hats to show that they used to be human.
You gotta show that. That's how you know they used to be human, is that they have top hats.
Exactly. Anything wearing a top hat used to be a human. You can quote me on that.
Snowmen, Imani.
Snowmen used to be human.
So it becomes a story about, like, losing yourself to violence more than anything, I feel like. Like, at least for Howl, that's the conflict, and that's sort of the metaphor presented by these monsters, is that, like, you're taking something that's good, and the magic is good, but you're using it for violence and destruction instead of beautiful things, and that's why you're turning into a monster, it seems like.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a beautiful movie. And, like, wonderfully, like, the art is gorgeous, and I still really like the characters. Sophie still has to go on this journey of realizing, like, who she is and trying to figure out what she wants when she's no longer forced to do things for other people. So, again, she turns into an old woman, and then it's just like, oh, they won't recognize me here, so I must leave. And then she, like, leaves. And it goes to seek her fortune and talks to things, and then, like, winds up in the castle, and I don't know if she doesn't make a contract with, she doesn't tell Calcifer that she'll break his contract, does she?
Don't think so. Maybe she tells him she'll help him, just, like, vaguely.
Yeah. Like, that's not like,
it's not a
thing
big plot
that's
point.
important. Right. Yeah. And then she just starts, like, cleaning the house. I still love that those are rampages that, like, still happen. There's no, I don't think there's a curse from the witch. Also, Michael is now, like,
he's
10,
a little boy.
10 years old.
He's so little. Probably because, like, Letty
so
and Martha
tiny.
aren't big characters, so it'd be confusing. And also, it might be potential that he would be a love interest for Sophie, and you can't have that.
Right, correct. Like, no. Yeah, and I think Calcifer is still great.
So
he's still
funny.
pathetic, and yeah, and, like, they, like, cook eggs on top of him. It was really funny. He's just like,
may all your bacon burn.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they still do, like, the moving the house scene.
That's cool. I liked how they did that in the movie. Just, like, the way they show the magic and stuff is super fun.
Yeah, which is really interesting because, so I listened to the audiobook and then, or this time around, listened to the audiobook, watched the movie, and then read the book. And it's interesting because so much of, like, I can see things happening with the movie's characters in the
Yeah.
book.
Huh.
So it's really hard for me to distinguish, like, in my like imagination, like it's all the visuals from the movie. So it's really hard for me to keep them straight
Yeah,
sometimes.
I can see that.
Yeah,
Interesting.
but they are completely
Yeah, and
different.
like as it goes on, it gets more different because the Witch of the Waste isn't a problem.
Right, yeah, and Sophie decides to like keep her around, and because she feels
And so
sorry
they
for
like
her,
become
and
a
Sophie's like,
family.
oh, she's just like an old woman
Yeah.
like me. Yeah, yeah. So they become a family, and she's like in the house with them, and she's like in love
Yeah,
with
she
Howl,
still wants his
and
heart.
like wants his heart.
Like literally,
Yes.
like wants
And, like,
to hold his heart and keep it. And
yes.
at the end, Sophie has to be like, "Hey, you have
Yes.
to give it back."
Be like, let go of Howl's heart. He needs
Yeah.
his heart. He will die without his heart.
Which makes an interesting sort of like that's a really interesting way to do it because there is that element of like he was in love with her once and she's like like you gave me your heart, I want it back, I want to keep it and hoard it for myself. And Sophie's different because she doesn't want to keep his heart, she wants to give it to him.
Exactly, and it's a different kind of like real love that actually like wants you to be a whole person and doesn't want to like have you tied to me. But it's interesting how this whole like idea of hearts and like whoever belongs to, like whoever your heart belongs to not only affects like you but like how you interact with the worlds and stuff. So one of our friends, Caitlin, was reading Stardust by Neil Gaiman.
Good book.
Which also has to do with hearts and like what does your heart really mean, and the action of possessing a heart like can give you power. It can also give you like bring you all of these things, but then also like in love, your ability to give your heart away to somebody else is like more powerful and is more of a physical thing, like physically giving them your heart than it is like just like emotional. It feels more permanent, you know, and it's like a very lasting type of like like you like of course Howl can't love people because his heart is controlled by a fire
it's
demon.
not his. I think that's also bringing that up, like that's a really cool thing about the movie is like it's showing like the people watching it, it's sort of creating this like it has this extended metaphor of the hearts and sort of showing like the difference between normal culture where it's like I have this person's heart now, it's mine, I'm gonna keep it and nobody else can have it because they gave it to me and it's mine now. And instead it's like, oh, I want your heart to be whole inside of you, and so then you're fully capable of giving love to me of your own volition rather than because I took your heart and I stole it.
Right, because I possess your heart and have this power over you.
Which I think is really cool. So I was reading an article the other day from Tor.com about the movie and the book, and apparently Diana Wynne Jones really likes the movie. And she thought...
That's cool.
So there's a quote from her about how Miyazaki understood my books in a way that nobody else has ever done, which is really interesting. And it's the article, I can send it to you at some point, but the article's talking about how it changes the details of the plot and the story, but it preserves what the story is doing. Because the story, because it wasn't made for a Western audience, partially, you can't have the sort of, you don't have the same sort of tropes that are ingrained, and the same ideas of like, oh, there's this poem from John Donne that's integral to the story.
Yes, that we all know John Donne.
And you don't have the same like, oh, we all know fairy tales go like this. And instead it's sort of taking that idea of using the tropes to say something. Where is it?
Yeah.
Like taking what we know about stories and saying something. Like, because it uses story tropes to say something about society. And so instead of talking about like how we define stories and identity and all that stuff, it's doing a lot more with like war and things like that.
Yes.
But like it was it talked a lot about how they adapted it for a Japanese audience and sort of creating this vague European setting that's often used.
Yeah. Which, I mean, makes sense why they didn't
Yeah,
have whales
yeah,
in there.
because it would be like, okay,
whales?
what?
And like, yeah, when you think about it that way, that it's less about the like plot things that happen in it and more about like how do we get the same message across. Like a lot of his choices of like even just like the way that the characters like carry themselves and like how you could tell. So like Sophie was old, but like she throughout the movie goes back from being like old to kind of being younger to being older, and like there's certain parts where she's more like herself. So when she's speaking up for Howl,
she like stands
she is
up
like
straighter,
being honest. Yes, and she's being honest with herself, and like then you actually get to see her like as a young person, and you hear her voice coming through, and that's like when she's being like true. And then she like goes back to like being old again, and like those like constant like ebbs and flows of her character are just showing her growth and showing how she's developing and how she's learning to be honest with herself. Because I guess at the beginning she like told herself that she wasn't really worth anything and her life is kind of past, and that like manifested itself in being an old woman.
Yeah, I remember the first time I watched it being like, why does she keep changing? Like, that's so weird. That's not how it's supposed to be. I really hated the movie the first time. I was also watching it with my family and my friend Ruth, and we had all just listened to the book together, and were like straight off enjoying the audiobook and had never seen the movie, and so we were all like, what is this garbage?
What is this?
But rewatching it,
I've been
like,
cheated.
It's a really cool movie. It's weird, but that's like classic Miyazaki films are just like slightly odd, and you're like, oh, okay, sure.
Yeah, and sometimes like grotesque and just kind of like stupid.
And the whole thing about Howl being a child, like in the article I was reading, it was interesting because in the movie he catches the star as a kid, and so his heart's still kind of stuck in that state of what it was when he gave it away. You see that in like the way he acts, but also like in his room, it's very like eclectic, and he's got stuffed animals on the bed, and stuff like that, and sort of like the contrast between Howl still stuck being a child, but also facing war and having to do something about that is super interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, that makes total sense because as a kid, his heart hasn't grown since then.
Because it's been with Calcifer.
Because it's right, yeah, and I love that in the book and in the movie they've kept the same relationship between Calcifer and Howl, and how like it's a symbiotic kind of relationship, but also like parasitic, but so like they're both not. Like, Calcifer is, like, getting... Like, they're both not...
Yeah, they're both kind of getting the short end of the stick.
Exactly. Like, Calcifer is stuck in this fireplace, and, like, Howl is slowly losing more and more of himself. And so, like, the two of them... But they still are fond of each other, and they still, like...
Howl feeds Calcifer eggshells when he cooks eggs and stuff. Yeah.
That was so weird. He's like,
yeah, and the part, I'm so glad they kept the part with the green slime, where he's like, what's the point of living if I can't be beautiful? And he just gives up and, like, summons the forces of darkness or something.
Yeah, that was them, and then it's like, oh, Howl.
Calm down.
Yeah, calm down. Or, like, the, when Sophie, they don't have the, like, weed killer moment, but another part where she's just so upset at the witch, and she's just, like, cleaning up a storm, and just, like, furying around the house, and she's just like, when I get my hands on that witch, I'm going to die!
Yeah, they're super fun.
They did keep a lot of, the great
There's
great
just
moments.
a lot less snarky characters. Like, they're just like, Howl, instead of being the obnoxious guy that's bothering Sophie, in the movie, Howl's a lot more noble and saves Sophie from the obnoxious guys.
Right, yes. And he is just, like, far more noble throughout.
But so is Sophie. Like, they're both a lot more like, oh, yes, we're decent people.
A higher class of human, they're less petty.
Yeah, because they're so petty in the book.
Yes. Yes, there's one part where like when they move to the hat shop, and Howl is showing her everything, and he's like really excited about it, and Sophie's just like kind of like
Yeah.
grumbling about it, and just kind of like yeah sure, and then she like starts to feel bad about it because Howl's like getting
Yeah.
put out because he's just like I did all of these things for her and she doesn't appreciate me, and just kind of like and so then Sophie's just like oh like maybe I should be nicer to him, and then she's just like wait. I've never felt bad about not complimenting him before. Why should I compliment him now? Just like, moves on.
Fine. I don't care. I'm gonna go yell at the flowers and tell them to be daffodils.
Right, exactly. The daffodils. You're like, okay.
Man.
So if you liked this episode, we hope to be doing this for the foreseeable future. I guess we never said this, but Mary and I were roommates in college, and we're out of college now. So, yeah, this is just, yeah. So, thank you so much for listening, and we will let you know what we decide to read next so that you guys can find it and read along.